We hesitated before sharing this one, not because it's loud or shocking, but because it's quiet in a way that stays with you. At Revenge Sins, we come across stories all the time, but this one sat heavier than most. It isn't about a single moment of explosion. It's about the slow realization that something precious was taken while everyone kept smiling. Mara Whitfield's story matters because it shows how loss can happen without anyone raising their voice. We'll step aside now and let her tell it. I didn't plan to ever talk about this. I've replayed that night in my head more times than I can count, usually when things get too quiet. I'm telling it now because the weight of it hasn't gone away, and pretending it didn't happen started to feel heavier than saying it out loud. We were sitting at the dining table, the kind of dinner where nothing feels urgent, plates half full, someone talking about traffic, someone else scrolling on their phone. My grandfather, Henry, was at the head of the table. He'd been quieter than usual, which I didn't think much of at first. Then he set his fork down. Not hard, just enough that the sound cut through everything else. I felt it before I understood why. "Mara," he said, calm, steady. "Why are you still renting in Chicago?" I looked up, confused. I started to answer, but my mother moved faster. "Oh, that," she said with a light laugh. "The lake house has been easier for Caleb to manage." My brother didn't look up from his screen. My father kept eating. Slow, deliberate. I remember thinking how strange it was that no one corrected her. My grandfather waited. He looked at me. "Not them. I thought that house was yours." Something tightened in my chest. I didn't know what to say because I didn't know when it had stopped being true. He nodded once, like he'd heard enough. "Finish dinner." We're driving out there. No one argued. No one joked it off. Chairs scraped back. Jackets were grabbed. I followed them out to the car with that dull feeling you get when you know something is about to break, but you don't know where the crack will start. Watching this moment, we remember thinking how often the truth enters a room quietly. No accusations, no shouting. Just one sentence that no one is ready to answer. In the car, I stared out the window, trying to slow my breathing. I told myself it was probably a misunderstanding. I told myself families fix things all the time. I didn't know yet how much had already been decided without me. If you're listening right now and something in this feels familiar, stay with us. Sometimes the smallest questions carry the heaviest answers. The drive out of the city felt longer than it was. No music. No one reached for the radio. My grandfather kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, steady in a way that made the silence feel intentional. My mother shifted in the back seat once, then went still. Caleb leaned against the window, phone glowing, thumb moving like nothing mattered. I tried to remember the last time I'd been at the lake house. Not a weekend stop or a quick visit, a real stay. It had been longer than I wanted to admit. When I was 21, my grandfather took me out there alone. No family dinner, no speeches, just the two of us standing on the dock, the boards warm under our feet. He handed me the keys and said he wanted me to have something no one could vote me out of. He said it like a joke, but his eyes didn't move. The paperwork was already done. My name on it from the start. He mentioned it now, halfway through the drive, like it was a fact that didn't need defending. "I bought that house for you," he said. "Straight gift." My mother exhaled behind me. "You were still figuring things out back then. It made sense to keep it flexible for who his voice didn't rise. It just sharpened. My father cleared his throat. We were managing it. You know how complicated those properties can be." He shook his head once. "It was simple. I gave Mara a home." I stared at the road, the words settling in my chest. I remembered the first summer there, sleeping with the windows open, leaving my shoes by the door, thinking, finally, something in my life wasn't temporary. Caleb laughed quietly. "I've been keeping it alive. Someone had to—" I didn't answer. I felt that old instinct kick in, the one that tells you not to push, not to turn a comment into a fight. I'd used it for years. It had always felt like being reasonable. We noticed how that instinct shows up right before someone realizes they've been trained not to ask. The lake came into view just after sunset. The water looked darker than I remembered. The driveway lights were on. Not mine. Someone else's timing. Someone else's routine. My grandfather parked and cut the engine. He sat there for a second, hands still on the wheel. "You told me this place was your anchor," he said, softer now, "unless someone took it." My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. I stepped out of the car and felt the ground shift under me, not physically, but in that way where you know the rules you've been following might not apply anymore. The porch light clicked on by itself. I watched it glow and realized I didn't recognize the switch that controlled it. If you're still listening, stay close. This is the part where things stop feeling like misunderstandings and start feeling decided. Caleb first came to the lake house with a duffel bag and a promise. Just the summer, he'd said. He needed space to figure things out after school, and Mom had already told him it was fine. Temporary, easy. I remember standing in the kitchen, nodding along, telling myself it made sense. The first few weeks were quiet enough. He slept late, fished in the mornings, left beer bottles by the sink like they'd disappear on their own. I came out on weekends when work allowed, brought groceries, cleaned a little. It still felt like mine then, just crowded. By August, his car was parked there every day. A boat showed up one afternoon, tied to the dock with a rope I didn't recognize. He said a friend was letting him borrow it. That friend started staying over, then another. The guest room filled. The fridge never seemed empty, but nothing in it belonged to me. Mom called once, midweek. Her voice had that careful softness. "Caleb's having a hard time. He really needs this right now." I remember staring at my calendar, thinking about a deadline I hadn't met yet, the rent check I'd just mailed in Chicago. I said okay. I always did. The next time I came up, my spare room was gone. Not locked. Just taken. His clothes in the dresser, a new mattress on the bed, a gaming console humming quietly like it had always been there. "You didn't tell me you were staying full-time," I said, trying to keep it light. He shrugged, eyes still on the screen. "You're barely here anymore." That landed harder than he probably meant it to. Or maybe exactly as hard. I walked through the house after that. The cabinets rearranged. My old photos moved into a drawer. The spare key I kept by the door missing. It felt strange, noticing all of it at once, like the house had learned a new routine without checking in. At dinner that night, Mom talked about how nice it was that the place felt alive again. Dad mentioned how much work Caleb had put into keeping things running. No one asked when I'd last stayed over. No one asked if I wanted it that way. I went out onto the dock alone, phone pressed against my ear as I pretended to take a call that wasn't coming. The boards creaked under my feet. I'd stood there so many times before, thinking this was something solid I could always come back to. We noticed how often that moment shows up in stories like this. The quiet realization, not anger yet, just the sense that you're already late to a conversation about your own life. The next morning, I packed my bag early. Caleb slept through it. On my way out, I hesitated by the door, hand hovering near the light switch. I left it on. I told myself it was nothing. On the drive back to the city, Mom texted, "Thanks for being flexible. This means a lot to your brother." I didn't respond. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself family things take time. What I didn't say out loud was that I already felt like a guest somewhere that used to know my name. The first notice came in an email I almost ignored. It was forwarded from my mother. Subject line trimmed down to something harmless. Lake house paperwork. Nothing urgent. I opened it between meetings, half paying attention, then froze when I saw the balance due. Property taxes. Past due. I called her right away. She picked up on the second ring. Voice calm, almost cheerful. She said it was a timing issue. The county had switched systems. She was already on it. "You don't need to worry about any of that," she added. "We've been handling things." I wanted to believe her. I needed to. Work had been heavy, deadlines stacking up, my days already stretched thin. I told myself this was what families did. One person carries the load so the other can breathe. A week later, a letter from the Homeowners Association showed up at my apartment. It wasn't forwarded. It had my name on it. Unauthorized short-term rentals, noise complaints, a warning about fines if the issue wasn't corrected. I called Caleb. What rentals, I asked, keeping my voice steady. He laughed, like I'd misunderstood something obvious. Just a few weekends. People love the lake. It helps with upkeep. That wasn't discussed. You weren't around, he said. Someone had to make decisions. I hung up and sat there longer than I meant to. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't notice until I took a sip and made a face. We hear this pause a lot. That moment when someone realizes they're being informed, not consulted. Another message came in, this time from the insurance company. Coverage adjustment pending review. I forwarded it to my parents. My father replied a few hours later. Short and clipped. Already addressed. Stop stressing. I tried. I really did. But the pattern was there now. Every issue moved past me. Every answer closed the door a little more. The voicemail from the bank arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. I listened to it twice before calling back. The woman on the line spoke evenly, like she'd said these words 100 times already. She mentioned a cash-out refinance, asked when I'd be available to confirm a few details. I told her there had to be a mistake. She paused, then said my co-owner had already confirmed. Co-owner. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, heart beating faster than it should have. I asked her to repeat it. She did. Same words, same calm tone. When I called my mother again, her voice softened the way it always did when she thought I was overreacting. You're spiraling, she said gently. Families manage assets together. You don't need to be involved in every detail. Something in me went quiet then, not angry, just alert. After we listened to that call, we remember thinking how quickly language can turn something wrong into something normal. I opened my laptop and pulled up the county records. I typed in the address I knew by heart. The page loaded slowly. When it finished, my name wasn't there. I closed the computer, opened it again, checked twice. Then I sat back and realized this wasn't about missed emails or bad timing. Decisions had been made, carefully, without me. The bank called back within the hour. I stood in my kitchen, one sock on, the other somewhere behind me, watching the light on the microwave blink while the line connected. The woman introduced herself. Polite and efficient. She said my name the way people do when they're reading it off a screen. She explained that the refinance was already in motion. Cash out, approved, a little over $500,000 based on the current value of the lake house. There was also a home equity line attached, $180,000 more. She spoke in complete sentences, no hesitation. I told her again that I hadn't signed anything. There was a pause, papers shifting on her end. According to our records, she said carefully, the quitclaim deed was filed months ago. Your interest was transferred into the Whitfield family trust. I leaned against the counter, the edge pressed into my hip. I remember noticing that. I didn't authorize that. Another pause. Longer this time. The trust amendment lists your brother as the primary beneficiary. She continued. Your parents confirmed on his behalf. Confirmed. On his behalf. I asked her to send me everything. She said she already had. I checked my inbox while we were still on the phone. Nothing. Spam. Trash. Nothing. When the call ended, the apartment felt too quiet. I stood there longer than made sense, phone still in my hand, like it might start talking again on its own. I called my mother. She answered right away, breathless, like she'd been waiting. I told her what the bank said. I told her my name was gone. She didn't deny it. You've been overwhelmed, she said softly. This was easier. For everyone. For who? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. For the family. She replied. We handled it. I heard my father in the background, a chair scraping. Someone clearing a throat. Then my mother again. Lower now. You don't need to be involved in every decision. Families manage assets together. Something inside me pulled back. Not anger, distance. After this moment, we remember how often people mistake calm voices for honesty. I hung up and called my grandfather. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he asked me to come over. No questions, no reassurance. At his house, he listened again, slower this time. When I mentioned the trust, his jaw tightened, just slightly. They moved fast, he said, faster than they should have. He walked to the hallway closet and took out a small metal box. The lock clicked open. Inside were papers I hadn't seen in years. The original deed, the gift letter. My name typed clean and clear. I don't give things halfway, he said, tapping the page once. And I don't forget where they go. I felt something shift then. Not relief, resolve. He picked up the phone and made a call. Spoke to a woman named Susan. He didn't explain much. Just said we had a problem that needed correcting. That night, my phone lit up with messages. From my father, clipped and tense. From my mother, longer, careful. From Caleb, you're blowing this out of proportion. His text read, "It's just paperwork." I set the phone face down on the table and didn't respond. The documents sat between my grandfather and me, quiet and solid. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up halfway through the night. The truth had finally taken shape, and once it did, it stopped asking for permission. We met Susan 2 days later. My grandfather drove. He always did when something mattered. He parked once, cleanly, like he'd measured the space before pulling in. No circling, no second try. Susan greeted us with a firm handshake and a look that didn't linger. She spoke plainly, asked for the folder, and flipped through the pages without comment. I watched her thumb pause at the trust amendment. Then, at the quitclaim deed. "This signature doesn't match," she said. Not loudly. Not like an accusation. Just a fact placed on the table. My grandfather leaned back slightly. "That's because it isn't hers." Susan nodded once and kept going. She pointed out the online notarization, the timing of the filing, the way the amendment stripped my name without direct consent. She didn't say fraud right away. She let the silence do some of the work. I felt my shoulders drop an inch. Not relief. Something closer to being believed. When Susan looked up, her eyes settled on me. If we move forward, there are consequences. Financial ones. Personal ones. My grandfather answered before I could correct it. Susan didn't push back. She just asked for confirmation, then slid the papers into a new folder. Outside, the air felt heavier, or maybe I was just noticing it now. My phone buzzed before we reached the car. My mother. I let it ring. The next call came from my father. His voice sounded tired, controlled. "We can talk this through," he said. "There's no need to make this bigger than it already is." I told him we were past that. He paused, then warned me about what this would do to the family, about the house they lived in, about Caleb's future. I listened. I always had. When I hung up, my grandfather looked at me, not unkindly. "They're trying to make you responsible for their choices." We noticed how often this is the moment people start to fold, not because they doubt the truth, but because the cost becomes visible. That evening, messages came in waves, long ones from my mother, softer now, shorter ones from my father, one from Caleb that just said I was being dramatic. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my grandfather while he sorted the remaining documents. He moved slowly, deliberately, like every paper had weight. "I didn't build this family so someone could steal from it," he said quietly, "and I didn't give you that house so you'd have to ask a permission to keep it." I nodded, eyes on the table, hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't touched. Later, alone in my apartment, I replayed his words, not the anger in them, the certainty. For the first time since the bank call, I felt steady. Not because things were fixed, but because they were finally being faced head-on. Susan called in the afternoon. I was folding laundry, half watching a show I'd already seen. I muted it when I saw her name. She didn't waste time. She laid everything out clearly, like she had before. If we moved forward, the trust would be unwound, the quitclaim would be voided, the house would come back to me. But the debt wouldn't disappear. The refinance and the line of credit would stay where they landed. With your parents, she said, and with your brother, depending on how the court sees his involvement. I sat on the edge of the couch, a sock slipping from my hand. She added one more thing. There's a real chance they lose their primary home. I thanked her and hung up. The room felt smaller after that. My phone buzzed almost immediately. My mother this time. I answered before I could talk myself out of it. Her voice cracked as soon as she heard mine. She said my name the way she used to when I was a kid and had scared myself. She talked fast, words tumbling over each other. How this had gone too far. How none of this was meant to hurt me. How families sacrifice for each other. My father got on the line next. He sounded steadier. He talked about loyalty, about how everything they'd done was for stability. He reminded me of how much they'd helped me growing up, like it was a ledger we were finally balancing. Caleb texted while they were talking. Just one line. You don't even need the house. You're fine. I ended the call without explaining myself. I didn't trust my voice to stay calm. Later that evening, I drove to my grandfather's place. He was in the kitchen, washing a mug, movements slow and familiar. He didn't ask why I was there. He just poured me coffee and sat across from me. I told him what Susan said, about the house, about the debt, about my parents. I told him I didn't want to be the reason everything collapsed. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he rested his hands on the table, palms flat. You're not causing this, he said. You're seeing it. I looked down, tracing a small chip in the wood. If I stop this, I said quietly, they keep the house. They keep everything. And you lose yours, he replied, just as quiet. We noticed how this is the moment where the story stops being about paperwork and starts being about permission. I stayed there a while longer. We talked about ordinary things. The weather, his neighbor's dog, the kind of conversations you have when both people know something heavy is sitting between them. Before I left, he asked one thing. What do you want to live with? That night, back in my apartment, I stared at my phone. New messages kept coming. Softer now. More careful. My mother said she was scared. My father said we could fix this together. Caleb sent a longer message this time, full of promises. I read them all. Then I opened my email and wrote to Susan. I told her to file. When I hit send, my hands shook, not from doubt, from the finality of it. I set the phone down and sat there, listening to the quiet. Nothing exploded, no alarms, just the steady feeling that something had been chosen, and it couldn't be unchosen. The court date came and went faster than I expected. No dramatic hallway scenes, no raised voices, just a small room, a few people sitting too straight in their chairs, papers stacked neatly in front of them. Susan spoke when she needed to, clear, controlled. She laid out the filings, the dates, the signatures that didn't line up. The judge listened without interruption, flipping through documents like they were inventory, not pieces of someone's life. My parents sat behind us. My mother kept her hands folded in her lap. My father stared ahead, jaw tight. Caleb showed up late and left early. He didn't look at me. The ruling came down in a calm voice. The quitclaim deed was void. The trust amendment invalid. Ownership of the lake house restored to me. The debt remained with those who authorized it. No one reacted right away. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. My father exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. Caleb stood and walked out without waiting for anyone else. We noticed how quiet the room stayed after that. Not relief, not triumph. Just the sound of chairs moving and papers being gathered. Outside, Susan touched my shoulder. "It's done," she said, not smiling, not apologetic, just factual. My phone buzzed once as I walked to my car. A message from my mother. One sentence. I didn't open it. I sat behind the wheel for a minute, hands resting there, not turning the key. My chest felt tight, but steady, like something had been braced. Later that night, I got an email from my father, longer than the rest. He wrote about disappointment, about choices, about consequences. He didn't ask how I was. I closed my laptop and went to bed early. Sleep didn't come right away, but it came eventually. Nothing felt like a win. Nothing felt like a loss either. Just an ending that didn't ask for celebration. And in that quiet, I realized the hardest part wasn't the verdict. It was knowing that everyone had been heard and no one had changed their mind. I went back to the lake house alone. Not right away. A few weeks passed, paperwork settled, keys mailed, silence where messages used to be. When I finally drove out, the place looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was standing in it differently. The house was empty, no boat, no extra cars in the drive. The fridge hummed quietly, almost apologetic. I walked through each room once, not checking for damage, just confirming what was mine again. I changed the locks myself. Took longer than it should have. I didn't rush it. That evening, I sat on the dock with my shoes off, feet just above the water. The lake was still. No music from the neighbors. No voices carrying across the surface. I stayed there until the air cooled. My grandfather came by earlier that day. He didn't stay long. We talked about small things. He reminded me where the breaker box was, which window stuck in the winter. Practical details. The kind that quietly say, "This place is yours to manage now." Before he left, he looked back once. "You did what you needed to do." I nodded. That was enough. When the sun dipped low, the porch light turned on automatically. I watched it glow against the darkening water. I left it on, not as an invitation, just as a marker. In the weeks that followed, my life felt quieter, not empty, just unburdened. I stopped checking my phone for explanations that never came. I made plans without running them past anyone. Small things, solid ones. Mara Whitfield didn't walk away with a victory speech or a repaired family. She walked away with something steadier, a sense of ownership that had nothing to do with deeds or court orders. If you've been listening this far, thank you for sitting with this story. Some moments don't need an audience, but they do need to be heard. The light stays on now, and for the first time, it's only for me.